This is Pawprint, an animal rescue community, episode 121. I'm Nancy Ree.
And I'm Harold Ree.
There was a plethora of information out there on how to work with separation anxiety, and some of the new findings that I was having were contradictory to those, and I wasn't super confident, just me and only me saying the information that you guys are getting out there is wrong. So, it took a lot of soul searching to feel I'm doing the best that I can do.
That's Malena DeMartini, renowned separation anxiety expert. Today we feature Malena as well as Irith Bloom on this separation anxiety special. Many of us have come into contact with or spend a lot of time with dogs who suffer from this behavior disorder, as Malena calls it. And hopefully this episode will educate you and also help you appreciate the hard work and dedication that folks like Malena have dedicated to separation anxiety. If you want to learn more about today's episode, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/121. Now, we'll be spending most of our time with Malena DeMartini, but first we start with Irith Bloom, one of our most popular guests, as she gives us an introduction to separation anxiety. Here's Irith.
Separation anxiety is a situation in which a dog is very distressed when left alone. Now, alone can mean different things for different dogs. So sometimes in separation anxiety, what you'll see is that the dog is okay as long as there's a person there. Any person will do. It could be some random human being you just literally ask to come in off of the street. For other dogs, they begin to feel this anxiety and distress when a particular human leaves, such as, their male handler or the female handler in the family, their sort of mom or dad. Those, by the way, are the hardest cases, just to say that up front. So just for humans, you can have two types of dogs. You can have if there's a human there, I'm fine as long as there is one at least human there. And if this one particular human leaves, then the world comes to an end and I'm really, really stressed out. There are also dogs that they're fine as long as there is another living being in the area, not necessarily something like an insect, but something like another dog or maybe a cat if they're buddies with cats, or potentially a rat if they're buddies with rats. As long as they're not alone and there isn't somebody for them to go and interact with, they're fine. But if they're completely alone, then they freak out. But it doesn't have to be a human being. So that's sort of three broad categories. Now, the treatment winds up being slightly different for each of these types of categories, which is the main reason I bring them up. But the actual behavior that you see when they are left without whatever that is, whether it's left without their main human or left without some human or left without anyone else around, is you'll see that they show signs of distress. And the signs of distress can vary very greatly. It can just be that they sort of don't settle very well and they pace around the whole time no one's home. It can be that they unfortunately get so stressed out that they urinate or defecate in the house because they can't control their bladder and their bowels. It can be that they get so stressed out they go and they start chewing on things in a really compulsive sort of way, not just I'm bored, but oh my gosh, I have to do something to keep my mind off being alone. And then the most difficult for the owners type of separation anxiety is when they're constantly trying to break out. They're either trying to dig through the door, eat through the windows. I had a client once whose dog would literally unlock the window and jump out of it, which was really, really scary, I have to say.
Wow.
So it can be a whole range of different levels of anxiety. Now, I want to really quickly clarify, sometimes the dog who is chewing in the house is not actually experiencing separation anxiety. Maybe it's a puppy who's just really busy. Maybe it's a dog who's never lived in a house before. The dog might just be bored. And if you can give them chew toys and put them in a confined space, they will no longer eat your house. They'll stay in that confined space and play with their chew toys and they'll be fine. If the dog truly has separation anxiety, a confinement space and chew toys won't do it. one of the things you'll often see is that you leave the dog with a food toy and they don't touch it the whole time you're gone because they're just too stressed to eat. So that's just sort of a picture of the broad range of things you might see. I'm sure I'm leaving some things out, but hopefully that gives you an idea.
As usual, you were being very complete, so yes.
I do my best. So possible causes, there are so many. I'm just going to list a few. So one is dogs who have been rehomed multiple times will tend to develop separation anxiety more easily. And that's for pretty obvious reasons if you think about it. I had a family, and then the family was gone, and I was living in this shelter. And then I went and I found another family, and I thought they loved me, and now the family's gone again. And they just get to the point where they don't trust that any place will ever be safe or that anyone will ever come back for them. And that's, unfortunately, a really good way to develop a problem with separation anxiety. Having said that, I will say a lot of newly adopted dogs have a kind of transitional separation anxiety where they're incredibly tense every time you leave for the first week or two. And then once you get past that first week or two, they realize that they're home and they settle down and it's over and it's not a problem anymore. So if you're lucky, sometimes that's what you wind up with. Other causes. There could be a really bad, I'll call it childhood, I guess puppyhood experience. And some of these bad puppyhood experiences include if something happened to the mother of the puppies and the mother of the puppies was taken away. It might be that she was sick. I've seen this where the dam was sick, unfortunately. It might be that there was some kind of injury to the dog. It might be that this is a really, really immoral breeder who just takes the puppies away from the mother. But if the puppies are taken away from the mother very early, they are more likely to develop separation anxiety and a lot of other anxiety issues, actually. Another potential cause to look for, especially if you are going out and getting a dog from a breeder, which is fine as long as you make it a reputable, ethical breeder, is if the puppy is what's called a singleton pup. And a singleton pup means the entire litter was one puppy. So instead of the puppy being born with 4 or 5 or 8 or 9 siblings, the puppy was born alone. And there's some evidence that singleton puppies are more likely to develop separation anxiety.
Did not know that.
Yeah, and I'll say singleton puppies, again, they'll tend to have more anxiety issues in general. The theory, but we don't really quite have the science on this yet, but the theory is that it has to do with early brain development, that they're missing certain important things in their early brain development that normally interacting with the other puppies in the litter and interacting with the mother would give them these things. And because they don't get them, their brain formation is a little different. They're more prone to separation anxiety, fear, and aggressive behavior in general. So the bottom line on this part is if you're going to get a dog from a breeder, be really careful which breeder you choose and do a lot of research about the litter, because even the best breeder can have a singleton puppy, and that's not their fault, but you're still likely to have more problems. So, having said all of that, whatever the cause, if you now have a dog who has separation anxiety in your life, you can't do anything about that past history. That past history is water over the dam. It is something that we can no longer control. So then we have to start looking at solutions. And in general, the solutions for separation anxiety are time-consuming and they take some effort. So you have to be sure if you're committing to this that you're ready to commit to a process that could take months. And you also need to know that some dogs will never get over their separation anxiety. The statistic is that about 75% of dogs will improve and about 25% will not. So you need to ask yourself, what am I prepared to do to help my dog if my dog doesn't get over this problem? Having said that, the great thing is that part of the solution is going to help you figure out things you can do to manage the problem if the problem doesn't get better. So the first part of the solution is whatever the definition of alone is for that dog, the dog is never left alone, period. You have to stop putting the animal in this stress state. And I want you to sort of picture this. Imagine that I'm training my dog. We'll talk about the training in a minute. I'm training my dog to learn to be more comfortable when I'm not there. But every 5th day, I leave the dog alone for 8 hours. So I'm saying to the dog, hey, don't worry, we're doing this training and it's going to be fine and it's going to be safe. And you'll see in a minute when I describe the training why this is so critical. Mm-hmm. And then you're leaving the dog alone and saying, look, it's unsafe again. And it's kind of like you're trying to heal a wound and you keep ripping the scab off of the wound. And so what you're going to wind up with is a dog whose separation anxiety becomes more and more deeply rooted, and you won't be able to make any progress at all. So, number 1 rule, dog is never left alone, whatever the definition of alone is. So how do I avoid leaving the dog alone? Well, if the dog is an any human will do dog, then I have humans come in, or I take the dog out to daycare, or I have a dog walker come and have a dog walker come and walk the dog while I am out. There's a lot of different solutions. You can hire a local teenager to sit with your dog. You can get your neighbor to take your dog in while you're out of the house. There's a lot of different solutions. But what you do is you make sure that when you are not doing active training, the dog is never, ever, ever, ever left alone. And then what you do is you do controlled training where you teach the dog to feel comfortable alone. And the individual steps are going to depend a lot on the individual situation. So I'll just give you some broad strokes. I don't want to get too detailed because the details are going to vary so much. But you're going to do things like, first of all, you're going to teach the dog to feel comfortable in a space that is enclosed. It could just be an X pen. It could be behind a baby gate. Crates are actually usually very difficult for dogs with separation anxiety. I don't recommend them for most dogs with separation anxiety. So you either put up a baby gate or put up a crate, put up a baby gate or put up an X pen, and you confine the dog in that area. And the way you start this out is you put the dog in there while you are sitting right outside of it. And make sure the dog is super comfortable in there, and you gradually move your way farther and farther away from that confinement area while you're still in the house, before you even do anything like go near the door. Another broad stage of training would be, okay, now my dog is comfortable in confinement, and I'm going to go and start doing things like walking out the door for 1 second and immediately walking back in. Or walking out the door for 2 seconds and immediately walking back in. And we really are talking about little tiny steps like this. So even when we're doing the confinement area training, it's going to be, I'm sitting next to you, now I'm going to take a step away from the confinement area, step back. Little tiny steps. The more you make this tiny steps, the faster the dog will actually progress. When you jump steps, sometimes what you'll do is you'll start ripping off that scab. And then the dog gets stressed out, and then you've lost some of the progress you've made. Now, a couple of other useful skills to teach dogs who have separation anxiety, and I know this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, but the 2 skills are stay and go to a mat. And the reason that you want to teach these behaviors is you want to teach the dog to feel more comfortable and be willing also to either stay still while you walk away, but there's no barrier between us, so the dog could go chase you down if he wants to, and so you're not playing with that I might rip off the scrab sort of zone. Or with go to a mat, what you're saying is, I want you, dog, to move away from me and go lie down over there. And you can choose not to. You can choose to be right next to me because there is no barrier and we're not going to accidentally rip off that scab. I'm going to keep coming back to this. But you can move away from me and that's okay. So it's important to teach the dog that being separated from you can lead to good things. So you teach them to stay and then you come back and you reward them with a treat. Or you teach them to go to a mat and then you go over to the mat and you reward them with a treat. Or you release them from the mat and they come to you and you reward them with a treat. But the idea is to give them that basic skill of being a little distance away from you and not feeling so stressed. Because one of the things you see a lot with separation anxiety cases is that the dog is constantly right at the person's feet. So these are all a few different things you can do. And so you build up, you teach your stay, you teach your go to mat, you get the dog comfortable in a confinement space, You start teaching the dog to be comfortable with greater distance away from you, with more time away from you. Then you start adding things like the door, the garage door opening, the car driving away, and you do everything in little tiny steps. As I said, each case is going to be a little different, and each case is going to have a lot of individual details. If you do have a dog who has separation anxiety, a great place to start looking for help is a website created by Malena DeMartini-Price called MalenaDeMartini.com. I'm going to spell her name. It's MalenaDeMartini.com. And what Malena DeMartini-Price has done, or Malena DeMartini has done, is she has created a very methodical way of dealing with separation anxiety, and she has taught her method to other trainers who are now certified by her. They're called Certified Separation Anxiety Trainers, or CSATs. The great thing about CSATs is they can work with you remotely. So even if there isn't someone who's a behavior expert in your area who's familiar with separation anxiety and has the tools to help you, you can call a CSAT who might be in the San Francisco area or in the Los Angeles area or in the Philadelphia area or wherever else it happens to be, and they will do sessions with you via Skype, via phone, and they will give you those little tiny steps that you need to help your dog be successful. So they'll give you guidelines that say, walk out the door for 1 second, walk back in. Walk out the door for 2 seconds, walk back in, or whatever it happens to be. They'll create a detailed plan that is personalized to your case. So I think they're a great resource. And if you do have separation anxiety issues, I would start at MalenaDeMartini.com. She has great success. She actually has a slightly better than 75% success rate with the methods she uses. Yeah. And all of her trainers, I know several of them, are fantastic. It's a really good program. So I would say, you can look on the internet. You can buy Malena DeMartini-Price's book. You can buy Nicole Wilde has a great book on separation anxiety that's a sort of self-guided book for people who actually have a dog with separation anxiety. That's Nicole Wilde with an E at the end. Bottom line, even with the help of a great expert, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, but it's definitely worth helping the dog because you'll be happier, they'll be happier. And I suggest, if you feel like it's all very overwhelming, that you get in touch with one of Malena DeMartini's certified separation anxiety trainers and get started off on the right foot.
We want to say thanks to Irith Bloom for sharing some tremendous knowledge. We now switch over to Malena DeMartini, whom Irith Bloom mentioned several times. Malena is a renowned expert when it comes to separation anxiety. She's based in California. She's an author. And not only is she a dog trainer herself, but she has, for several years, trained other dog trainers to specialize in separation anxiety. If you want to learn more, go to MalenaDeMartini.com or go to our show notes. This is pawprint.com/121. Here's Malena DeMartini and her journey with separation anxiety, which began about 16 years ago with a career change into dog training.
I made a large career change and I decided to do some studies on animal learning and become a dog trainer. And I did that through Jean Donaldson's Academy of Dog Trainers. I heard about separation anxiety through that course. It was a very long, extensive course. We were very much schooled about the fact that this was an incredibly difficult disorder to work with. So when I graduated that course, it was a bit serendipitous that one of my first cases that contacted me was a separation anxiety case. And I was green and new, and I thought, nope, not going to do this. But for a number of reasons, ended up taking on the case with full transparency about my novice status and learned so much more from that point forward. I always tell people that separation anxiety chose me. I did not choose it. As a matter of fact, most trainers to this day have a lot of trepidation about working with separation anxiety. And what happened when I got that very first case that I was mentioning, we had this incredible outcome. The dog was fixed. Everything was fantastic. And I live in this small-ish area of the San Francisco Bay Area. And all of the training professionals said, "Oh, did you hear? Malena had this great success with separation anxiety." And they all said, "I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to send it to Malena." And so very quickly after that first case, I started to receive a lot of separation anxiety. Unbeknownst to me, that first case that I took was a little bit of a rags to riches story, and that dog probably would have been fine without my intervention, but it was what made people think that I could do this. And so I started getting all these separation anxiety cases, and they were much more unique and difficult, and my success rate was quite varied, and it made me realize that I've got to really up my game. And so it was only a couple of years max into me doing dog training of all sorts, whether it was aggression or leash training or obedience or what have you. I was doing all of that. But then the caseload of separation anxiety just kept pouring in. And I realized if I was going to continue to do it, I needed to learn how to do it right.
How'd you get from first really becoming known to really feeling like you kind of almost, I don't know, mastered it? Or I don't know what the right word would be.
Yeah, mastered it wouldn't be the right term, but I appreciate that because I think that, once we think we don't have an opportunity to do better or learn more, we're sinking ourselves. I think there's always an opportunity for me to improve upon what we're doing now. And I hope that as more and more research comes to light, that we get to learn more and do better. As to your question, the process that I went through, and because I was a relatively novice trainer, every time I was contacted by a separation anxiety client, I said, okay, full transparency here. I've had some success and I've had some lack of success. And I know a lot of the principles, but I don't know exactly what is going to be right for you and your dog. And so if you're willing to take me on, I know we're going to tweak things, try things. Some of the things will work. Some of the things won't work. It's going to be somewhat dependent on your dog. And it's going to be somewhat dependent on the fact that I don't know exactly the answers yet. So I took a lot of clients on without really knowing the real answers. And so over the course of time, and it took a lot of time. I mean, it took several years before I started to feel fairly confident in what I was doing and thinking, you know what, the various nuances that come to me, I know how to work with them now. And I was very nervous about, there was a plethora of information out there on how to work with separation anxiety, and some of the new findings that I was having were contradictory to those. And I wasn't super confident, just me and only me saying, hey, the information that you guys are getting out there is wrong. So, it took a lot of adjusting, a lot of sort of soul searching to feel comfortable with, I know that I'm doing the best that I can do, and I'm doing it in a manner that is making for the most success rate.
So then if you compare maybe like a way you would approach a separation anxiety case today, let's say, versus, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I mean, what would have been the difference that you would have seen?
The difference was enormous. And for a number of reasons. Number one, I learned so much. And in the beginning, I was very set on typical types of training advice that were given by all sorts of people in the industry. Just stuff a Kong, put them in a crate, get them used to their crate with, a lot of food toy stuff. And once they reach that 30-minute mark, they'll be fine. There was a lot of this advice out there. And I mean, it was pervasive. And over time, I started to realize, stuffing a Kong and putting a dog in a crate is actually not the answer. And so that has changed dramatically. I also gained a lot of confidence in being able to talk to people about this disorder and what their role in this disorder is and what my role in this disorder is. And it's quite intensive. We work with people, 5 days a week. It's not like we're talking to them an hour a day, 5 days a week, but we are writing their individualized criteria for them 5 days a week. And I think that I've really truly come to the point that I've realized that is absolutely necessary. But lastly, I think the biggest change had nothing to do with me. It had to do with technology. 8 or 9 years ago was the first time that I was able to meet with a client online. So something like FaceTime or Skype, right? We were also able to record the sessions online, and I was able to view the dog in their natural environment. Whereas before I was going over to the client's house, sitting down in their living room, smelling like, chicken treats and 10 dogs that I'd worked with that day. And the dog was super excited to see me. And then I'd say, okay, let's leave now. Well, that's not a normal absence for a dog. I mean, what is the normal everyday situational environment that dog is in? So sometimes we got a false positive. Sometimes we got a false negative. There were many times that I thought, I don't know, because what we're doing is stepping out the door and then, holding our hand up to the door, listening really closely where the dog could still hear us and smell us. And, there was so much that was because of technology we were stuck with doing in a way that was not conducive to working with dogs with this disorder. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for that. In addition to changes in technology, anything else that you can think of that really has changed over the years?
I would say the biggest thing that changed for me, and I would say this is mostly for me personally, but I think it's been such a dramatic difference, potentially even I think will be in the industry, is that in late 2013, I had a funny phone conversation with a lovely, lovely person named Veronica Bautal. She and Gina Ferris run Dog Tech, which is a business support program or business support business for dog professionals. And I talked to her and I said, I don't know what to do. I am getting so many clients now that I'm having to turn people away and I feel terrible, but I don't really know anybody that I can refer to, because I've now gotten to the point that I really understand how to work with this disorder. And I know if I refer to just the local trainer down the street, they're going to say, put the dog in a crate and stuff a Kong. And I'm not okay with that, because that's not what is working. And so she said, well, why don't you think about taking on an apprentice? And I said, okay, all right, well, that makes sense. And then a couple days later, I called her back and I said, you know what, if I take on one apprentice, I'm going to have her dance card filled in 2 or 3 weeks. And she said, well, if you're going to already train one, why don't you train two? The little aha moment went off for both of us, where I said, well, hold on, if I'm going to train two, I may as well make this into a class, into an online course. And that's what I did. And I had my first course with 8 trainers back in the end of 2013, I think, beginning 2014, something like that. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm just going to tell these guys a few things. This is common knowledge to everybody. But to my surprise, it was incredibly impactful to all of them. And they became, my second-hand people. They became my family, really.
Yeah.
And I continued with that course. And what has become of that is that I now have people and friends and colleagues that have graduated the course that can give me their experience with separation anxiety in the manner that we're treating it. Because before it was me and just me, and I really had no one to talk to about it. So it was very impactful, and we're learning so much because we have a big group now that does the separation anxiety training in such a specified manner that it's really made a huge difference.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. We're speaking to Malena DeMartini about the topic of separation anxiety. Well, now let's just get to that question that I think everybody's wanting to ask, which is, Malena, how would you define separation anxiety?
I can't tell you how much I love this question, because I think that most people think, oh, it's a dog that just doesn't like to be alone. I mean, and to be fair, that is an appropriate yet simplistic answer. When we talk about fears, phobias, anxiety disorders, panic attacks, things like that, that's what we have to look at when we're speaking about separation anxiety. And most of the time when we're speaking about fears and phobias and anxiety disorders in humans anyway, we are looking at those fears that are somewhat irrational. So it is irrational to think that you are going to die when you stand up to do public speaking. And that is one of the number one fears in the world, is to stand up and do public speaking. And people will, have heart racing and sweating and dry mouth and feel like they are going to die, when the risk of public speaking is pretty minimal. Okay, someone may throw a tomato if you're pretty bad, but for the most part, it's a bit of an irrational fear. There's so many of them. I am deathly afraid of spiders, and they can be minuscule, and I'm still running out the room, screaming like a 2-year-old child. That is an irrational fear. And with separation anxiety, I think the thing that is so important that people understand is that, yes, it is irrational to you and I that the dog, I leave my dog every day and I come home every day. Why would my dog not figure this out yet? But it's not about figuring it out in such a quick order like that. It's an irrational and extreme fear and phobia. Because of that, I really feel like people need to have the empathy that is required to work with this disorder, rather than saying, and we do get calls all the time that say, my dog has been barking while I'm gone and my landlord, issued a complaint. I need you to fix it. Boy, I understand that. I understand that unequivocally. This is a big problem. But unless that individual can understand that we have to treat the underlying anxiety disorder and not just get rid of the barking, we're probably not going to be successful.
Okay.
So it is definitely a panic disorder, and some dogs experience it in such a way that they cause self-harm, they do great damage to the home, they urinate and defecate, or they howl all day, and there's many, many manifestations of how it is displayed.
Right. Let's say out of 10 phone calls you get, how many of them truly are what you might define as separation anxiety?
I think that's a slightly unfair question for me, because not unfair of you, but to ask, but unfair for me to answer, because I have now sort of garnished a reputation as being the person to go to for separation anxiety. And so I think I've got a rather self-selecting group that by the time they get to me, they have done some rule outs. And so the majority of the clients that contact us do have actual either clinical separation anxiety or what we call isolation distress, which is very similar, just slightly less pronounced. But I don't think that that's the case for most trainers. I think that separation anxiety, the term or the phrase, has become quite familiar. If I say pass the Kleenex, you'll know I'm talking to you about pass the facial tissue, right?
That's right.
I think separation anxiety has become the Kleenex of behavior disorders. So people will say, my dog ripped up my trash, got into the waste bin, I need to, work on his separation anxiety. And that's certainly not the case. Or a dog that is eliminating in the house, or even a dog that is barking a lot or all day. It doesn't necessarily happen to be the case. But I think that I am a little bit of an exception in that by the time people get to me, they really are, most of them are suffering from separation anxiety.
Okay. What are some of the sort of the key questions that you tend to ask as people refer themselves to you or as people are referred to you?
When I go through an initial phone call with any client, my goal is multifaceted. And my first goal is to help them understand that I understand what they're going through, because so many of these clients have been isolated by friends and family and relatives and coworkers, et cetera, that just say, oh, just put a bark collar on the dog, or, oh, that dog is just causing you so much disruption, just relinquish him. So typically by the time they get to us, they're in dire straits. I mentioned that very first client that I got, the reason that I took that separation anxiety client on, being a very novice trainer, was that I said, oh, gosh, I appreciate you calling me, but I'm very newly graduated and I'd like to refer you on. And suddenly this woman broke into tears. And very audible tears on the phone. And she said, I understand, but could you give me the names of someone or some people that will be able to help us, because you are the seventh trainer that I've contacted. It has stuck with me since that day, because I realized that so many clients that are going through working with a dog with separation anxiety are facing multitudes of people in their daily life that are telling them, relinquish the dog. Oh, just set the dog in a crate and let him bark it out. He'll be fine. Or, so many difficult types of advice. And they're not always finding a trainer right away. And so my first goal is to let them know that we absolutely understand what they're going through. But then, of course, there is the rule out. And I do have a questionnaire that I send out that they find on my website that does go through a bit of like, what is the dog experiencing? And so we'll talk a little bit about when the dog is experiencing this, what exactly is the dog displaying as their, body signals, and how did this person come to that arrival that it is separation anxiety. Most of the time, we can actually determine that it is at least some form of alone time discomfort. So sort of separation related behavior in that first phone call. It's fairly rare that, and not that it's a diagnosis, but we can say, okay, we know that this is something that we need to work on, and we'll proceed from there. On rare occasions, people will say, I'm just not so sure, because sometimes this happens and sometimes it doesn't. And then we switch with them and we say, all right, we'll do an initial assessment. And that initial assessment, which can only be done via video. Like if you show me a picture of a dog that has destroyed the home while they were left alone, I could not tell you whether that dog was having an absolute panic attack or whether that dog was having the time of his life.
That's
partying
right.
It up, right? And I have many examples of that where I have seen people show me these pictures of, the feathers of the pillows are all strewn all over the house and the shoes are chewed up and the disaster area. But then when I assess the dog via video, I can say, oh, look at that. He's having so much fun. This is not separation anxiety. And so the only way to truly assess whether it is separation anxiety or not is via video. And we use online tools, which allows us to work with clients all over the world, which is, truly amazing.
In general, how many weeks, how many months is there a quote unquote average treatment plan?
I have a love and a hate relationship with this question.
I'm sure you do.
Yes. And oftentimes, particularly with a client that is contacting me, I will have to explain to them that, this is a sentient being who's experiencing extreme anxiety. Like if you walked into a psychiatrist or a psychologist's office and said, I'm having severe panic attacks and I'm experiencing depression and anxiety, I'd like to buy 4 sessions because I need to be done in 4 sessions. Like, they would not be amenable to that.
Right.
And they would also not be able to tell you, this is going to take 3 weeks, or this is going to take 6 weeks, or this is going to take 6 months. Because anxiety, fear, phobias like that are manifested so differently and are of varying different gradients. So some dogs may even appear relatively mild, like they are just sort of whining, pacing, panting, barking sometimes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the experience that they're having is really mild.
Right.
Just like the difference between I go running out of the room screaming when I see a spider. Well, I have a friend of mine that is deathly afraid of spiders, but when she sees spiders, she, picks up the nearest object and throws it at the spider, and she won't cry or scream or anything like I do. But could you say that her fear is less or more intense than mine just on her outward reaction? Not really, not really. And so we don't always know the level of anxiety that's being experienced. And as such, we can't necessarily predict how long it will take. And I always tell people, I've had clients that get through their anxiety disorder in a relatively quick amount of time, a month or two. And I've had clients that I have worked with that at the end of the 2-year mark, we finally realized success of being able to leave the dog alone all day long. And so that's such a broad spectrum that I am always very careful not to say, well, the average is about, X, because your dog could get through it super quick, or your dog could be one of those ones that just, is very resilient because of the level of anxiety that they're experiencing.
Right. Case by case, right? Case by case.
It is case. There's no such thing as a cookie cutter dog.
Have you ever seen a situation where when people move, can that sometimes be a positive, or can that sometimes actually make the problem worse?
Both, actually. We get a lot of people that contact us that say, my dog's been so happy and healthy and wonderful my whole life, and we just moved to a new location, and now he's freaking out and howling and destroying stuff. So moving can be very, very much a precipitating event for the onset of separation anxiety. The flip side of that is that for a lot of people, when they move to a new environment, it is a little bit of a clean slate. And so as long as they handle the new environment pretty gingerly and make sure that their dog goes through a gradual process of what we call desensitization, they can get through it almost more quickly because they don't have sort of the baggage, if you will, of I've been left alone for weeks and weeks and months and months and months at this other place. And now, no matter what you do, I'm totally freaked out by it. So sometimes a new environment can be a positive. But it is a very, very, very common precipitating reason that the separation anxiety pops out. And one of the things that I'd like to say in case because it just popped into my mind, in case we don't get to this in our interview at some point in time, I really want to absolve people of the guilt of having a dog with separation anxiety. So many of the people that call us say, well, it's my fault because I cuddle him so much, or because he sleeps in my bed, or because I, X, Y, or Z, and, or because I moved or whatever. One of the things that we're finding in some of the recent studies, separation anxiety is one of the most studied behavior disorders in dogs right now. And one of the findings that we've discovered recently is that there is definitely the appearance of a genetic predisposition for these dogs. One dog will move from one house to the next house and be like, cool, this is my new house. Love it. Great. As long as my bed is here and my food is here and my toys are here, I'm cool. Yet another dog will move to a new home, having been fine in their other home for years and years and years, and fall apart. Mm. And that, what we're looking at, is really more of a genetic predisposition, that this was an event that, cause that to pop out. And so I really want to make sure that guardians are so absolved of any guilt that they have created this problem. I think you could try really hard with a lot of dogs and never create separation anxiety. Other dogs, you could do one little misstep and the separation anxiety would be there, and it's no one's fault at all.
Hopefully some listeners will really feel at least somewhat of a sense of relief, right? Hearing those words.
Absolutely.
Anything that you've learned, like, I don't know, percentage of the dog population outside of dogs, any other types of animals who tend to manifest this a lot?
The statistics are fascinating, actually, particularly when it comes to the percentage of dogs. So here in the U.S., depending on which study you read, people are saying somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 to 20% of dogs. If you calculate that out, that's well over 13 million dogs in the United States alone. That's a lot of dogs.
And your waiting list would be what? only 250 years, right?
Well, hence you understand the reason why I was saying that I needed to hire an apprentice way back in the day. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of dogs. And now in other countries, so we are the country that cites the lowest statistics. In the UK, there's an organization called the APDT, and they do an extensive questioning of every client that they are in contact with, regardless of whether it's aggression or separation anxiety or just, I want to teach my dog to lie down on a mat when I'm cooking my dinner. And they show close to 80% of dogs have some sort of separation-related behavior problem. So statistics vary quite widely. And there's several other studies, some of them showing 40 to 50%, 56%. But in my head, when I think, okay, I'm just going to go with the lowest, that 17 to 20% is still humongous. And it to me, it is absolutely a welfare issue. I don't think that everybody knows when their dog is experiencing, separation related problem behaviors, when they live out in the country and they leave their dog, I don't mean the country, but, away from sort of close neighbors and nobody's complaining. And I just spoke to a client this morning that was in tears because she said that she'd been leaving her dog for 3 years. It wasn't until someone said, your dog is always panting and sort of drooling when you come home. Don't you find that concerning? And she said, well, I guess, but I never really thought about it. And so she decided to videotape her dog and saw that her dog was howling, screaming, pacing all over the house for the entire time that she was absent every day. So I think there's a lot of people that don't even realize that their dog is experiencing some form of separation anxiety. And not to say that every dog, I know I look through my separation anxiety glasses and I think, oh my gosh, every dog probably has some form of this. And I don't feel that way. I know that a lot of dogs are very comfortable and confident, but some of the studies really show us that there's a large percentage of dogs that are really experiencing this problem.
Okay. Well, we're speaking to Malena DeMartini about the topic of separation anxiety. Why don't we just rewind the clock a little bit? Can you tell us a little bit about maybe either the animals in your life currently or maybe just growing up? What's been your experience with animals?
Well, you had to ask, so you're going to laugh at this, and everyone should laugh, hopefully with me, not at me. 8 years ago, well, a little under 8 years ago, I adopted an adorable little puppy. Within 24 hours, she had decided that the sun, the moon, and the stars rose above my head, and had horrific separation anxiety. I mean, irony of all ironies that I would adopt a separation anxiety dog. Oh my gosh. Now, I will say the very first thing that I did was contact all of my colleagues. Now, I didn't at that time have the trainers that I've been working with. So I really knew no one that knew how to work with separation anxiety very well. But I contacted all of my colleagues and I said, oh my gosh, one of you guys, help me. I don't know what to do. And of course, everyone very heartily laughed at me and said, wait a second, aren't you the separation anxiety guru person? Shouldn't you know what to do? But what was so wonderful about this experience is that, yeah, I had been working with separation anxiety for a long time already. But what it made me really, to the core of my being, understand is that it's so hard to work with your own dog with separation anxiety because there's such an emotional attachment there. You don't know how to write your day-to-day criteria steps. You don't know exactly like, well, should I try 5 minutes today or should I try 2 minutes today? Yesterday she whined. Is whining too much? Is whining too little? I don't know. And your judgment gets so clouded by your emotional relationship with the dog that it is, I think, close to impossible to do it on your own. I say close to impossible because I have had clients contact me that I've done a one-off, hour discussion with them, said, here's what you're going to do. And they're like, okay. And then, a couple months later, they contact me and they're like, thanks so much for your help. My dog's fine now. And I'm like, wow, you're a superhero because I couldn't do it myself.
Well, that's like the Home Depot job, right? Someone walks into Home Depot and then 2 months later, they built their own house.
That's exactly right. I had a guy and we were talking right before we started this interview about airplane building. And I had a guy tell me one time he had read my book and got in contact with me. And he said, some people, particularly nowadays, can build their own airplane. And he said they can follow a book, they can follow diagrams, they can research, and they can build their own airplane. The rest of us, we need to take United Airlines.
Right. There you go.
And and I thought it was so funny because he had read my book and he said, I understand everything, but I don't even know where to begin.
Right.
I understand that more so now because of going through this with my own dog than I did prior, because just that personal experience brings a whole new layer onto everything.
And what's the name of your dog?
Her name is Teeny. It's Tini, like Teeny DeMartini.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Yeah, she's a comedic relief every day.
Great. And what makes Teeny special to you?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, the fact that she became such a lesson in my life makes her special. But what I think really makes her special is that she's a firecracker of a dog, a border collie or Australian shepherd type on steroids, but in a little tiny compact 11.5-pound body. I mean, she'll play ball until she drops dead. And if she drops dead first, she might still continue to play ball because she would find a way. But when we're not playing and when I'm working and talking with clients or whatever, she is so happy to just be hanging out with me and snuggling with me and, listening to me talk on the phone with clients all day long. And, until we go out for our next ball session. And she has become such an endeared part of my life. I'll tell you a quick funny story. My husband didn't have a choice when I found Teeny. I was like, I found this dog and we are adopting her. And he was like, do I get some input on this? I was like, yeah, no, actually, I'm sorry, you don't. And he said that he didn't tell me this until years later, but he said for the first couple of months, he really didn't like her at all. And understandably, I mean, she came in and a day later, she had separation anxiety and she was howling. And she not only had separation anxiety if people left, if I left and my husband was home, she would howl and cry and pant and whine. So my husband was always stuck whenever I would go to the gym. He was stuck watching this distressed dog. And he was like, oh, I didn't like her at all. And I was so mad at you for making this decision. Well, good news. He got back at me because a couple of years after we adopted her, he stumbled across this little home in the town that we live in now. And he said, I found the home that we're going to buy. And I said, don't I have any say in this? And he said, nope. You played your card, I'm playing mine.
Okay. So, all right.
But now he loves her. And now I also love the home we live in. So it worked out okay.
Okay. All right. Love this story. Thank you for sharing that. What's the best way to get in touch?
The best way to get in touch is to go to the MalenaDeMartini.com website. There's a lot of information there. And particularly, I would encourage people that have dogs with separation anxiety or have clients that they work with that have separation anxiety or in foster or in whatever realm. I have a blog that I update fairly often, and I am happy to, in my blog, to give tons of tips and what to do and what to think about and how to address things. And so there's a blog there. I also have a Facebook site that those blogs get updated to. It's called Treating Separation Anxiety in Dogs. And so you can find me on Facebook. But if clients need or trainers that need help, need to get in touch with me, the best way is through the website.
Any way to find, is your book still in print? Any way to find your book?
Oh, absolutely. The book is still in print and still enjoying a lot of people buying it, etc. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Treating Separation Anxiety in Dogs. You can find it at dogwise.com, who I love. And you can get it either in printed version or ebook. And I'm releasing this to you, big secret, Harold. No one knows this really, but there's a second book that's going to be coming out in the near future that is going to go into a lot more detail and explain some of the pieces that I think I missed in the first book.
Okay.
Writing a book is a big thing, and you don't realize how much you miss until you write it.
Gotcha. Okay. Hopefully for this year or when?
With all the editing and the publishing and all that stuff, probably won't be done by this year, but probably early next year.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. What does the rest of 2017 look like for Malena DeMartini?
Yeah, well, I do a lot of speaking engagements, which I absolutely adore. I love going to different markets and talking to either trainers or guardians about separation anxiety, what it entails, how to address it. And I do typically I do a 1-day, sometimes a 2-day seminar. So I've got a fair amount of those planned for the rest of the year. I'm leaving for Vancouver just in a couple of weeks, and I've never been there before, so I'm really excited about that.
Yay.
So, I've got a fair amount of those planned. But then twice a year, I run my separation anxiety certification program. So that's coming up. The second round of that is coming up in July, and we've got a nice big group, and I'm super excited to start working with them. So, and that course runs about 13 weeks. It's pretty intense. So for that 13 weeks, I'm head to the desk pretty much. Not, my husband's like, do I get to see you? No, not for 13 weeks. You don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. That it sounds intense, but sounds like it's obviously the benefits can be huge, right?
They really can, particularly for those people that have. And I know in animal rescue, we know these people. There's people that are advocates for just about everything and anything, right? You have people that are like, I love, say, pit bulls, and I want to advocate for them. And then we have people that say, I love chihuahuas, and there's too many of those in the shelters, and I want to advocate for them. But then there's people that are a little more specialized that say, I love those fearful dogs, and I want to help them come out of their shell and help them find the right home. And so for those people that just love that fearful, anxious dog, which sounds sort of funny, but boy, we get our hearts caught on these dogs because oftentimes we relate to that. And so for those people, it can be a really wonderful, career portion for them as well.
Really, it's the last question that we like to ask. When it comes to animal rescue, if you had that magic wand and could do something about the state of animal rescue, maybe specifically regarding separation anxiety, what would you do?
You would think, actually, my answer would be for no dog to have separation anxiety. But actually, well, yes, that would be lovely. My answer really is I would wish and wave my magic wand so that every single person that was a guardian to a dog would have an ability to understand and empathize with what their dog is feeling so that they can truly always pursue the best line of treatment. I want dogs to be happy always. I want the guardians to have an understanding of dog behavior So, because that's so paramount for dogs to be happy. And I think that we haven't gotten there yet with dog guardians rather, understanding the behavior and knowing the ways to empathize with it. It's really easy to say, darn it, my dog chewed up the trash and I'm really mad at him, or whatever, any number of behaviors. And so if I could wave my magic wand, it would be for a sprinkling of true understanding and empathy of dog behavior and body language.
Well said. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, really, the floor is yours. Anything else that you haven't mentioned yet that you'd love to share with us?
Oh, wow. See, I didn't expect that question. Oh, no. How many hours do we have? No, I'm kidding.
My battery says 7 more hours, so we can go.
Okay, we're good. I think really the only thing that I would like to close with is that this is a behavior disorder that is not simple, but it can be easy. And when I say that, what I mean is that the process by which we go through working with this disorder means you're working with your dog, maybe 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And particularly if you're working with a trainer like one of ours, we're writing out exactly what you're going to do in that 30 minutes. So it's not overwhelming to do, but it doesn't happen quickly. And if it were my second way, magic wand wish, it would be that people could really understand the slow nature of the recovery of this behavior disorder. Because, and I'll tell you something that might sound shocking to you or anybody listening, but there are times at 3 weeks into the protocol or 4 or 5 weeks into the protocol, we're only leaving the dog alone for, 9 minutes or 12 minutes or something like that, right? And that sounds like, Malena, you're crazy. But if people give up at that point, and they'll give up because they'll say, well, obviously this isn't working. I've been doing this for 3 weeks and my dog's only at 7 or 9 minutes or whatever. And I will so often try and convince them but actually it's working. It's just working slowly. I really want people to understand that, if you put in the time now, whether it takes a month or 2 months or 6 months or however long it takes, you can have a dog that is confident and happy and healthy in the home alone. We are in this society very desirous of getting a quick fix. And this isn't a quick fix, but this is a family member, in my opinion, and many of the opinions of my colleagues and guardians that I work with.
Absolutely. And
so we do what we need to do, and we can get them through with persistence and patience and guidance.
We want to say thank you to Malena DeMartini for sharing her story. If you want to learn more about Malena DeMartini, as well as our first guest, Irith Bloom, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/121. If you'd like to meet me or Nancy on social media, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Search for This Is Paw Print, all one word, and you should be able to find our profiles. If you'd like to listen to more episodes of Paw Print, you can find us on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, also known as iTunes, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio. Search for Paw Print Animal Rescue and hit the subscribe button to get the latest episodes immediately. We just want to say thank you to all of you for sharing Paw Print with your friends and family. We're now at 121 episodes, and we have plenty more exciting episodes to come. So thank you for your support. And remember, you spread a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time on Paw Print
is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.